Podcast Strategies, episode 60. One killer podcast strategy that most people are not using. Thanks again for joining me this week. Raise your hand if you've heard the phrase, the riches are in the niches, or you've been advised to niche down or be an inch wide and a mile deep with your business. I'm raising my hand right now, and I bet you are too. I want to talk this week about a niche that most people don't think about when constructing their podcast and thinking about an audience for their podcast. And that is the niche of your geographic area, your location where you live, where you operate your business. This is very similar to the riches are in the niches principle. People are starving for hyperlocal or local content right now. Think about it. Really, all they have is Google. All they have is Yelp. They don't get a lot in terms of information from newspapers anymore. There aren't a lot of local websites or anything like that that help them know about their local area. And so the idea of taking your podcast and focusing it a little bit on the local area, or even starting up a locally focused podcast, is a great idea, especially for industries like realtors or lawyers, anyone that services clients in a specific area or can only operate in a specific area. The reason being is that you're providing these people a service, you're providing them information that they are starving for, that they can't get anywhere else, and you are then the ambassador that's going to bring it to them. And I want to share a couple of stories with you. I have a friend, Mark Bologna, who lives in New Orleans, and he is not a travel agent. I believe he's a computer engineer or something like that. But he started a podcast about New Orleans. And you think, oh, well, there's probably a ton of travel podcasts about New Orleans. Well, what Mark did was he created the Beyond Bourbon Street podcast, which is an insider's guide to New Orleans. Essentially, it's all the stuff that you don't hear about in all the other travel sources about New Orleans. So for people who really want to go and be a tourist and discover what's really the essence of that city, this is content for them. And it's helped Mark grow actually a business around this podcast. In less than 2 years, his podcast has over 400,000 downloads, and he's recently been asked to write a travel guide about the city of New Orleans. I'm going to share another example with you from one of my clients, Parker Larison. Parker is a personal injury attorney, and he wanted to do a podcast, but he figured that doing a podcast about personal injury law might be boring, because he wanted a podcast that would open him up to new clients. If you're familiar with the personal injury attorney world, you've most likely seen TV commercials and billboards, and he didn't want to do that. Now, Parker operates out of the small area of Ponchatoula, Louisiana. It's basically a bedroom community that's halfway between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. I don't know why I picked two Louisiana examples, but these are some good ones that I have. So there's not a lot of people that live in Ponchatoula. The population is actually only 10,000 people. Now, what Parker decided to do was, rather than talk about personal injury law, he focused on the region. He interviewed people on his podcast that are local heroes, people that everybody knows. The principal of the one high school in town who just retired after 25 years. The linebacker from the high school that went on to LSU and has now come back to the town and is starting a nonprofit to help kids in the area. That's what he did, was feel-good stories that let people know a little bit more about the area. And then he also does things like restaurant reviews. He recommends businesses that he uses, and just in general has become the digital mayor of the town. Now, remember I said the population of Ponchatoula, Louisiana is 10,000. It's not really a tourist destination, But when Parker started out this podcast, he created a Facebook group for the podcast just to, get people in there to create a community around the show. So in the first month of having this podcast out in the world, he got 1,000 members of that Facebook group. Now remember, the population of the town is only 10,000 people. So 10% of the people in the town are now part of this community around the podcast. So those are two great examples of why having a hyper-local, locally focused podcast, even if it doesn't necessarily relate to the business that you're in, can allow you to get in front of people and build relationships with people who might potentially be your clients in the future. So there you have it. If you're ready to make a real change in your business in 2019, start today by, first of all, subscribing to this show on Apple or Stitcher or Android or Google Podcasts or whatever. Number 2, please leave me a review. It's really helpful in getting the word out to other people. Apple likes it when people rate and review shows, and it puts it up in search results and things like that. And number 3, share it with a friend, a colleague, a coworker who you think would enjoy my episodes. So that's it. I look forward to seeing you next week in the next episode. What are you an expert at? If you have a podcast, chances are your show features your area of expertise. But how much do you really know about podcast production? My clients often thank me for making their shows sound great, but in my opinion, the main benefit I provide for all of my production clients is time. Time to do what they are experts at. Time to grow their businesses, time to focus, and not stress out trying to do the technical production work that isn't their area of expertise. If you have a podcast or want to start one and you're ready to save 3 hours or more each week to focus on the stuff you're an expert at, I'd love to do all of your editing, mixing, mastering, and show distribution for you so that you can focus on growing your community and business. You can find out more at emeraldcitypro.com/services.